Shalom and shalom, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to Trumpet's Call. I'm Maria. I pray that you are holding on to faith, amunah, and holding on to hope during these times. Thank you for joining me once again on the channel and for another session of our Torah Tidbits. Someone had asked me in the comment section, is the new moon on the full moon or when the moon is just a sliver? Now, I have my own opinions about this, of course, and I teach that the moon is a sliver. But others are saying, nope, there's scriptural evidence to prove that the new moon is actually a full moon. When the moon is full, that's when it's new. So I thought that I would take this topic up and bring a presentation based on scripture and allow you to make your own decision and your own determination based on what the text says. So today we're going to be talking about, is the full moon the new moon? That's the question we're taking up today. So let's get started. So we'll begin reading today in Tehillim, Psalms chapter 81, verses 3 through 6. We're reading in the King James Version. Blow the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed, on our solemn feast day. For this was a statute for Yasharal, and a law of the Eluah of Jacob or Yakub. This he ordained in Joseph or Yasaph for a testimony, when he went through the land of Egypt or Mitzrayim, where I heard a language that I understood not. I removed his shoulder from the burden, his hands were delivered from the pots. Okay, so this particular verse of scripture in Psalm 81 or Tehillim 81 is the verse of scripture that people indicate proves that the new moon is the full moon. Okay, when we read it again, we see that the trumpet is being blown in the new moon. So this is the time of the new moon, and it says here, in the time of the appointed. When you look up that word appointed, in the Strong's Concordance, that word is kasa, and that word kasa means appointed or full moon. And so they say, well, since this word means full moon, what you're seeing here is blow the trumpet in the new moon in the time of the full moon. So they're saying, see, it's proof that the new moon is the full moon. Okay? And I can see how they would arrive at that conclusion. But that's not all the text says. And you cannot take that one portion of a line of this text out of context and arrive at a conclusion. So let's continue to read it and see what it says. It says, on our solemn feast day. So the trumpet is being blown on a solemn feast day. Okay? For this was a statute for Yasharal and a law of Eluah. Okay, so we're going to come back to this text because this is going to be the foundation of our study today. We're going to come back to it. But I wanted to read to you this text in the New King James Version, just a snippet of it. Psalm or Tehillim 81, verse 3. Blow the trumpet at the time of the new moon, at the full moon, on our solemn feast day. So it's very clear in the New King James Version that they're translating that word kasad as full moon. And they're also indicating a time of a solemn feast day. Okay? That's going to be important as we continue our studies. So going back to the reading in Tehillim chapter 81. So we're looking at this word, new moon. Blow the trumpet in the new moon in the time appointed on our solemn feast day. The Hebrew word for new moon is kadash. Kadash. And it means new moon, monthly, first day of the month, or lunar moon. Those are all the ways in which this word kadash is translated. The new moon or monthly. It indicates a month. Okay? So when we go back to this text, we see blow the trumpet in the new moon or in the new month, the new moon or the new month in the appointed time or the full moon on our solemn feast day. For this was a statute for Yasharal and a law of the Eluah of Jacob or Yakub. So our job here is to discover whether or not the new moon or the first day of the month is actually the full moon or when the moon is just a sliver. So let's continue to seek the text and see what it has to say to us. So we're going to be reading in Numbers or Bamidbar, chapter 33, beginning at verse 1. These are the journeys of the children of Yasharal who went out of the land of Egypt by their armies under the hand of Moshe and Aharon. Now Moshe wrote down the starting points of their journeys at the command of Yahuwah. And these are their journeys according to their starting points. They departed from Ramesses in the first month. So we have the children of Yasharal leaving Egypt in the first month. And on the 15th day of the first month at this time was called Abib. Now, in modern Judaism, they call it Nisan, but it was called Abib. On the day after the Passover, the children of Yasharal went out with the boldness in the sight of all the Egyptians. Okay? So what we're seeing here is when the children of Yasharal left Egypt, it was the 15th day of the first month. Okay? That's a clue. So let's go back to our text in Tehillim, or Psalm chapter 81. So let's read it again. Blow the trumpet in the new moon in the time of the appointed full moon, on our solemn feast day. For this was a statute for Yasharal. And let's skip down to verse 5. This he ordained in Joseph for a testimony when he went out through the land of Egypt, where I heard a language that I understood not, and I removed his shoulder from the burden, his hands were delivered from the pots. What it's saying here in Tehillim is this is the time when the Father removed the burden of Egypt from the shoulders of the nation of Yasharal. That's what this scripture is referring to. It's saying, this is the times when I delivered your hands from the baskets, from the pots, from having to do hard labor, and from Egyptian bondage and slavery. Okay? So he ordained these statutes for us during this time. On the night before our ancestors left Egypt, the Most High gave ordinances to them regarding the keeping of the Passover and the feast that was to follow the Passover, okay? And this is when this happened, and this is what the scripture is referring to. So the blowing of the trumpet at the new moon at the appointed time is taking place around the time of our removal from Egyptian bondage. And when we go back to the scripture, once again, and look at that time, we see that we departed, our ancestors departed Egypt on the first month, on the 15th day of the month. Okay? On the 15th day is when we departed. So if you put these two together, and they're talking about the same thing, we're going to see that the 15th day of the first month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Chag HaMatzah. The Feast of Unleavened Bread begins on the 15th day of the first month. And it just so happens that on that feast, it happens at the time of a full moon. Okay? So what we're seeing here is a time when the Father is indicating to us what the rules, what the regulations, what the objectives are. He's pulling us out of Egypt, and it's happening during the time of the Passover, happened the day before, the night before. The very next day, when we got on up out of Egypt, was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That was the 15th day of the month of the first month. And it happened to be a full moon. And every 15th of the month is a full moon. When you abide by the Most High's calendar and you allow the calendar to speak, you'll see that every 15th day of the month is a full moon, just as the 15th day of the month was a full moon here. Okay? But I know you're probably not convinced. You're like, well, that's not enough information. Well, let's continue on and see what we arrive at. In Shemot, or Exodus chapter 17, verse 12, we read, "So you shall observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, for on the same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance." Once again, we see the Father telling us that it was on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Chag HaMatzah, that he delivered our ancestors from Egyptian bondage. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is the day after Pesach, or Passover. And as you remember, our ancestors celebrated the Passover, or Pesach, the night before. They killed their lamb. They put the blood on the doorpost. They kept the Passover that night so that the angel of death could pass over their homes. The very next day was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and that is when they left. Okay? So Scripture is very clear here when our ancestors left Egypt. So we're going to go back to our scripture and we're going to read, blow the trumpet and the new moon at the time of the full moon. So the question is, if we know that our ancestors left Egyptian bondage on the 15th day of the month, how could it be the new moon? The new moon happens on the first day of the month. So if we learn that our ancestors left Egypt on the 15th day of the month, how could that be the quote-unquote new moon? When the new moon brings in the new month, the new month, it determines when the new month begins. So we can't have both. We can't have the month being the 15th day and the first day at the same time. Those two things don't follow, they don't make sense, and they're not accurate. Okay, so either the full moon is the 15th day of the month or it's not. And the text is already telling us that it is. Okay? So we're going to dig a little deeper and see if we can allow Scripture to wrap these things up for us. We're reading in 1 Samuel or Shamuel, chapter 20, verse 5, and we're reading in the New King James Version. And Dawood, said to Jonathan, indeed, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king to eat, but let me go that I may hide in the field until the third day at even. So we see here Dawood, who's afraid that King Shaul is going to kill him, and he doesn't want to go to the new moon feast at the king's palace. So he's telling his friend and confidant, Jonathan, I don't want to go to the new moon feast, which happens on the first day of the month. I don't want to go. Let me go and hide in the field, and I'll come and hook up with you again on the third day of the month. So this scripture is telling us that the new moon is on the first day of the month, not the 15th day. Okay? The new moon is on the first day of the month. So this scripture has confirmed for us it is always on the first day of the month, not the 15th day. Okay? Let's continue on. When we look at this calendar on the screen, we will see the new moon feast day, which it is a feast day. It happens every month on the first day of the month. It determines the new month, the new month. And as you look at this, you'll see that the Shabbats then are determined based on the new moon. So the Shabbats are always going to be on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th of every new month. They're always going to be the same number on the calendar. Always, okay? So there's consistency in the scripture. There's consistency with the Most High's plan and with his purposes. So as you look at this image on the screen, you will see the cycle of the moon, okay? So you see the waxing crescent moon at the bottom left of the screen. It's a crescent moon and it's waxing, meaning it's getting larger and larger and larger. So it's getting larger and larger and larger. And then you see around the 8th day of the month or so, you'll see the first quarter moon, okay? And then you have a waxing gibbous moon, which means it's almost full. And then around the 15th day of the month, just like I stated, you have a full moon. Always, always, midway through the month is when the moon is going to be full. On the 15th day of the month, that is when you have a full moon. And then the moon begins to wane. So then you have the gibbous waning moon. The light of the moon is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Eventually you end up at the last quarter half moon, and then it's the 22nd day. That would be a Shabbat day, by the way, okay? And so would the 8th day. Then you arrive at the last day of the month. There's a day or two in between those 2 days where the moon is completely dark and it does not give its light. When the moon begins to give its light again, that marks the beginning of the new month, the new month. There is just a sliver, not a full moon. So you can see, based on the image on the screen, it's impossible for the first day of the month to fall on a new moon when the 15th day of the month is the full moon. Okay? Let's continue on. So now we're going to talk about sounding the shofar. In the scripture in the book of Psalm, or Tehillim we read, it spoke of sounding the shofar. Okay, so we're going to talk about that for just a minute. We read in Numbers or Bamidbar, chapter 10, verses 8 through 10. And the sons of Aharon, the priests, shall blow with the trumpets, and they shall be to you for an ordinance forever throughout your generations. And if ye go to war in your land against the enemy that oppresseth you, then ye shall blow an alarm with the trumpets. And ye shall remember before Yahuwah your Eluah, and ye shall be saved from your enemies. Also, in the day of your gladness, and in the day of your appointed feasts, and at the beginning of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, and they shall be a memorial for you before Eluah. I am Yahuwah, your Eluah. In this passage of scripture in the book of Bamidbar or Numbers, we're being told here the instances in which the trumpet is to be blown. Okay? First, we see that the trumpet is blown to sound an alarm when it is a time of war. That is the first time that the trumpets or the shofar is to be blown. Okay? Again, you see the shofar or the trumpets blown in the day of gladness, in a day of mirth, in a day of excitement or happiness. That's when you blow the trumpets. The trumpets are also to be blown during the time of appointed feasts, as we read in Tehillim chapter 81. Also, the trumpets and the shofar are to be blown at the beginning of your month. So what we see here, the trumpets are to be blown for war, in times of gladness, for appointed feasts, and at the beginning of months. The trumpets can also be blown as a gathering cry to gather the people together to say, come together, assemble yourselves. That is another instance in which the trumpets or the shofar can be blown. So we see here instances in which the trumpet or the shofar is to be blown. That is what this passage in Numbers of Bamidbar chapter 10 is indicating. But we also see the same thing in Psalm Tehillim chapter 81. This verse of scripture in Psalm 81 is essentially a repeat almost of what we just read in the book of Numbers. Let's read it again with the perspective that we just gained from reading the book of Numbers chapter 10. Blow the trumpet in the new moon. Okay? That's what it's saying. Blow the trumpet or the shofar in the new moon, in the time of the appointed feast, on our solemn day. The way the scripture should read is that it should read, as we read in the Berean Standard Bible Version, it reads, sound the ram's horn, shofar, at the new moon and at the full moon on the day of our feast. And the feast is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. For this is a statute for Yashral, an ordinance of the Eluah of Yaakov or Yakub. Tehillim, Psalm chapter 81, is telling us when the ram's horn is to be sounded. The same thing we learned in Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 10. It's telling us, sound the ram's horn or the shofar at the new moon, and it's also to be sounded at the full moon on our feast day. And what feast day associates with the full moon? The Feast of Unleavened Bread. Always. It's always going to be on the 15th day of the month, which is associated with a full moon. This is a statute forever. So Tehillim is merely restating what the text had already said, okay? And it's giving us hints and clues about when the new moon is. So if we know that the Feast of Unleavened Bread occurs on the 15th day of the month, if we know that, then we know that 15 days prior to that had to have been the new moon. What did the new moon look like 15 days prior to a full moon? Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because we already know that. Science tells us, our own eyes tell us, common sense tells us, we know what the moon looked like 15 days prior to it being full. It was a sliver. That's exactly what it looked like. As a matter of fact, when you look at the word for new moon, the word chadash, the word chadash means renew or repair, to make new or to be new. It's as if something existed and then it waned until it became invisible. And you couldn't see it anymore, and you thought it was gone. And then, when you thought all hope was lost, you begin to see this little sliver of light once again, indicating that the moon was once again renewing itself. It's been made new. It's almost as if it was broken and it was now being repaired. So the barest of Sliver now is showing us that the moon has now renewed itself to start its journey again, waxing, 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 becoming full, and then waning, 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 and then going back to darkness. And that is what's happening with the moon. And that is what this word Chadash is indicating. A time when the moon is new, when it's just the barest of a slither, because it's as if it had just been reborn. So as we take a look at this image on the screen, this little video, and it's showing us the cycle of the moon. So it goes from light to darkness and from darkness to light. And you can see that when that moon is just the barest of the sliver, that is Chadash. That's when the moon is new. When it's full, this is around the 15th day of the month, and then it wanes back to darkness. And when it wanes back to darkness, we will once again have it on the other side come back to light. And that is the cycle of the moon, but it is also the cycle of the day. The evening and the morning were the first day. The evening comes, then the morning, and then you have a day. The moon goes dark, then it goes light, then it goes dark. And these are the cycles of the moon. And it goes 30 days at a time. Okay? That's the way the Father set it up. So I hope I have demonstrated to you in this little Torah tidbit that the new moon cycle happens from darkness to light. The moon begins from darkness, and then when it begins to show that barest of sliver, the moon has been renewed and it is a new moon. It is impossible for the new moon to be the full moon because the full moon happens on the 15th day of every month. Okay? And when you look at any calendar and you count back 15 days, for example, the calendar on the screen, we can see on the 15th day of the month that the moon is full. And when you count backward 15 days, where do you arrive? You arrive at the first day of the month. And the moon is the barest of slither of light. That is the first day of the month. That is the new moon. So I pray that I have demonstrated to you what the scripture is saying on this topic, what common sense is saying on this topic, and that we can finally put this baby to bed, to rest, regarding when the new moon is. The new moon is when the moon is just the barest of sliver of light. It's being reborn. It's being renewed. Much like us. We can see ourselves in a picture of the moon. We have been taken into darkness and despair, and it's almost as if our lights went out. Like we were no more as a nation, as a people, as a group of Hebrews. We were no more. We were in darkness. We were hidden. We couldn't be seen by the world. But slowly but surely, the Father brought forth the barest sliver of light, of recognition, of remembrance. And as we, as a group of people, begin to remember ourselves and remember who we are and return to the Father and return to Torah, our light is getting brighter and brighter and brighter, and the moon is waxing larger, and the light of the moon is waxing larger and greater and greater and greater as we remember ourselves in the land of our captivity. And soon, this moon is going to reach its full strength, its full brightness, where all those who are inheriting life will come to a full realization of who we are and its fullness and its brightness. The full moon on the 15th day of the month, corresponding to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So I pray that you have gotten something out of this lesson, brothers and sisters, and I pray that this answers questions and that it doesn't stir up more debate. This is my answer to the question as I have read in the scriptures. I'm not up for a debate. I don't debate the scriptures. I present what I see in the scriptures, and it's up to you to take these things to the Father and allow him to speak to your heart. If you disagree, that is fine. Don't debate me on it because I won't debate. And I won't allow debate in the comment section. We must love one another, even when we don't agree. And on matters that we don't have agreement, let us go to the Father and seek out the Father for answers to our questions. Let us not debate one another. Debate is of Babylon, and we're not Babylonians. We're Hebrews. We're Aparim. Hallelujah. So the answer to the question, according to my determination of the scriptures, is the new moon the full moon? No, the new moon is not the full moon. The new moon is when the moon is the barest sliver of light, and the light of the moon has just been renewed. Chadash. Thank you for joining me once again on the channel, brothers and sisters, and for another session of our Torah Tidbit. It is important for us to explore these topics as we are coming out of our Babylonian malaise and the stupor that we've been in for about 2,000 years now, since we were kicked out of our homeland. We have been handed over from country to country, from nation to nation, going hither and yon, being mistreated and brutalized and abused. And we have been lied to and deceived. And we are coming back to truth. And so we are searching these things out, and we're trying to be like the Bereans, searching out the scriptures, seeing whether or not the things that we've been told have been so. And in many instances, we found those things to be lies. So as we come to a recognition and a realization of truth, let us be kind to one another. We may not see everything from the same perspective right now. We all see through a glass darkly, but then face to face, and we will know as we are known when that which is perfect is come. Until then, let's be precious with one another. You may see the scriptures from a completely different perspective than I do, and I may have insights that you don't have. But when we come together in love and brotherhood and fellowship, and we put together our perspectives, we are baruched with a fuller picture. So let us recognize the gift that we have in each other. May the Most High Yahuwah baruch and keep you, brothers and sisters. And may He make His face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May He lift up His countenance upon you and grant you shalom, shalom, peace in every area. And we thank the Most High, Yahuwah, who has taken us from darkness and is taking us to light. And oh, what a day of rejoicing it'll be when our light, as the moon's light, is at its full strength. We will walk as sons and daughters of the Most High Yahuwah, bright like the sun in the kingdom of our Father. Yahuwah be praised forever. Shalom and shalom, brothers and sisters.